At 10 o'clock on a crisp Saturday morning, the mountain air was shattered by the sound of tires on gravel. I stood on the wraparound porch of my home, a place I had bled for, while a line of luxury SUVs snaked up my private driveway. 50 strangers stepped out. They wore cocktail dresses, tailored suits, and expressions of mild inconvenience as their designer heels sank into the dirt. At the front of this absurd parade was my mother, Beatrice. She held a massive, $500 anniversary cake in her manicured hands, her face stretched into a practiced, picture-perfect smile. She thought she had won. She thought her daughter had finally broken under the weight of her demands. She looked past me, her eyes darting toward the small attic window above the garage. That was where she assumed my 15-year-old daughter, Hazel, was currently locked away in the dark, recovering from a brutal brain surgery, just so Beatrice could have a place to serve champagne to her country club friends. "Hide her in the attic," my mother had texted me. Those 5 words had fundamentally changed me. They were not just a request, they were an eviction notice from my own family. They were the ultimate proof that in my mother's eyes, my child's life was an ugly inconvenience that needed to be swept under the rug so it would not ruin her aesthetic. But as Beatrice strutted toward the porch, ready to play the gracious host in a house she did not own, her smile violently shattered. Standing directly in her path, arms crossed over his uniform, was Sheriff Amon. If you are watching this, you probably know what it is like to be the invisible child. You know the exact sinking feeling in your chest when the people who are supposed to protect you decide to throw you to the wolves instead. Stick around to hear how my parents turned their anniversary into a vicious trap, and how I made sure the jaws of that trap snapped shut on them instead. 5 days earlier, none of this madness had reached my doorstep. I was driving Hazel home from the hospital. The sky was a pale, bruised purple over the Colorado mountains. Hazel sat in the passenger seat, her head wrapped in thick white bandages that covered the fresh, angry surgical staples tracing her scalp. At 15, she had just survived a grueling 6-hour craniotomy to remove a mass that had been pressing against her motor cortex. Her immune system was practically non-existent. Her brain was swollen, highly sensitive to light, sound, and stress. The neurosurgeon had looked me dead in the eyes and warned me that a simple infection, or even a sudden spike in her blood pressure from anxiety, could trigger a catastrophic seizure. For weeks, the sterile white walls of the ICU had been our entire universe. Now, turning onto the long, winding dirt road that led to our mountain home, I just wanted to breathe. I work as a commercial real estate appraiser. It is a ruthless, exhausting profession. I routinely work 70 to 80 hours a week, analyzing zoning laws, dissecting property deeds, and fighting with developers. I do it because it pays the bills, and because it allowed me to buy the sanctuary. The house was a modest, but beautiful log cabin nestled on 4 acres of pine forest. It was quiet. It was safe. "Do you think the bears missed me?" Hazel murmured. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper over the hum of the car engine. I glanced at her, my heart physically aching at how fragile she looked. "The bears have been extremely bored without you leaving half-eaten sandwiches on the deck. I had to tell them you were busy getting a haircut." She managed a tiny, crooked smile. Humor was our life raft. It was the only thing keeping us from drowning in the sheer terror of the last few months. When we finally walked through the front door, the house did not look like the home we had left. I had transformed the living room into a sterile medical bay. The plush rugs were gone, rolled up and stored in the shed so dust would not irritate her lungs. I had dragged a hospital-grade air purifier into the corner, its blue light humming softly. A small mountain of hand sanitizers, sterile gloves, and blood pressure cuffs sat neatly organized on the kitchen island. Hazel shuffled toward the couch, her steps unsteady. I hovered behind her, terrified she might lose her balance. "You turned the living room into a bunker," she noted, gingerly lowering herself onto the cushions. "It is a healing fortress," I corrected her, pulling a soft fleece blanket over her legs. "And nobody breaches the fortress without my explicit permission." I meant it as a joke. I had no idea how literal that statement was about to become. For the first few hours, peace actually seemed possible. Hazel slept. I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop, quietly catching up on property valuation reports. The silence of the mountain was like medicine. Then, my phone buzzed on the granite counter. It was a notification from the family group chat. A chat I usually kept on mute, but had unmuted to give them updates on Hazel's surgery. My stomach gave a familiar, sickening lurch. Whenever my family reached out, it was never to offer help. It was to extract something from me. I stared at the screen, watching the little typing bubbles appear and disappear. I did not know it yet, but my mother was about to set a match to our entire relationship. What happened next would force me to choose between my daughter's survival and my family's twisted need for dominance. Would you have answered that text? I did, and it changed the trajectory of my entire life. To understand why my mother felt entitled to claim my home while my daughter was fighting for her life, you have to understand the sick architecture of our family dynamics. I was not just the black sheep. I was the workhorse. My sister, Cleo, was the golden child. Cleo was 3 years younger than me, but in my parents' eyes, she was a fragile, brilliant artist who needed constant protection and funding. I was the sturdy, unfeeling machine they could ignore until they needed a problem solved. Let me give you the numbers, because as an appraiser, I quantify everything. When I was 28, I drained my savings, skipped vacations, ate ramen, and pulled endless all-nighters to scrape together $210,000 for the down payment on my mountain home. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. My parents did not contribute a single dime. They did not even show up to help me paint the walls. Beatrice said the dust would ruin her allergies, and Alistair, my father, said he was too busy managing his golf schedule. 6 months later, Cleo decided she wanted to be a beauty influencer and launch her own organic skincare line. She had no business plan, no chemistry background, and no work ethic. My parents remortgaged their own house to hand her $150,000 in cash. The brand collapsed in less than 8 months. Cleo spent the money on a lavish launch party, a leased sports car, and a luxury apartment in Los Angeles. When the business folded, my parents did not demand the money back. Instead, Beatrice cried about how the market was too saturated and how the industry had failed her brilliant daughter. I never brought it up. I knew better. In our family, pointing out the blatant inequality was treated as a crime worse than murder. If I ever mentioned money, I was labeled greedy and jealous. But their financial favoritism was not enough. They also had to steal the credit for my hard work. The moment I finished remodeling the kitchen of my cabin, installing the butcher block counters with my own bruised hands, Beatrice started referring to my house as the family retreat. I remember a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. I had driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to attend. We were sitting around their dining table. Cleo was scrolling through her phone, ignoring everyone, while my parents fawned over her new designer dog. We were thinking, Beatrice announced, swirling her wine glass. Cleo needs a quiet place to brainstorm her new vlog series. We told her she could spend the month of July at the family retreat. I stopped chewing. You mean my house? Beatrice sighed, that heavy, dramatic sigh meant to signal that I was being difficult. Oh, Maeve, do not be so territorial. Family shares. Besides, it is just sitting up there in the woods. Cleo needs inspiration. I live there, I said, my voice tight. I work from there. It is not a vacation rental. Cleo rolled her eyes, not even glancing up from her screen. God, you're so uptight. You just sit at a computer looking at boring spreadsheets all day. It is not like you are doing anything creative. Just let me use the guest room. I will not even talk to you. Alistair slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Your sister asked for a simple favor, Maeve. After everything we have done for you, you cannot share a little wood cabin for a few weeks. Everything you have done for me? I asked, the anger finally bubbling over. I bought that house myself. I pay the mortgage. I pay the taxes. Money, 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 Beatrice sneered, waving her hand dismissively. That is all you care about. You have a very cold heart, Maeve. You have no sense of family. I left that dinner early and drove back up the mountain in the dark, crying until my ribs ached. That was the pattern. They demanded my resources, my space, and my compliance. If I resisted, They spun a narrative that I was a selfish, ungrateful monster. I learned to build walls. I stopped inviting them over. I kept our interactions strictly to holidays and brief phone calls. I thought distance would protect me. I thought if I just asked for nothing, they could not hurt me. But a narcissistic family does not respect distance. They see a boundary as a personal insult that must be destroyed. As Hazel grew older, she started to notice. She noticed that Grandma Beatrice only called when she needed me to fix a tech issue or review a contract. She noticed that Grandpa Alistair only hugged her when someone else was watching. When Hazel was diagnosed with the brain tumor, the walls I had built around my heart turned to steel. I told my parents about the surgery, expecting a brief text of sympathy. What I got instead was a horrifying display of their true nature. They did not see a terrified teenager fighting for her life. They saw a stage. They saw an opportunity to play the roles of the grieving, devoted grandparents for an audience. And the moment I tried to close the curtains on their little play, the gloves came off. My phone vibrated again against the granite counter, vibrating so hard it rattled against a bottle of Hazel's anti-seizure medication. The sound pulled me out of my memories. I picked up the device. The screen was bright in the dim kitchen. I did not know it yet, but my mother was about to demand the one thing I would never, ever surrender. My daughter's safety. To fully grasp the sheer insanity of my mother's text message, I have to take you back to the hospital, exactly 1 week before Hazel was discharged. The neuro ICU is a place where hope and terror hold hands. The air always smells of iodine and floor wax. The only sounds are the rhythmic, haunting beeps of heart monitors and the soft squeak of nurses' rubber shoes. Hazel was on day 3 post-op. Her head was heavily bandaged, her face swollen to the point where she was almost unrecognizable. She had tubes running into her arms and a drain extending from the surgical site to relieve the pressure in her skull. She was fragile. She was in agony. She needed utter darkness and silence. I was sitting in the plastic chair beside her bed, my hand lightly resting on her arm, when the heavy ICU doors swung open. I looked up, expecting the nurse to check Hazel's vitals. Instead, Beatrice and Cleo marched into the room. I physically froze. I had explicitly told the front desk that we were not accepting visitors. The nurses had strict orders. But Beatrice has a talent for bullying receptionists, wielding fake tears and aggressive guilt trips until people just give up and let her pass. Beatrice was wearing a heavily perfumed silk blouse, clutching a massive bouquet of lilies. Lilies. In a neuro ICU, where patients are incredibly sensitive to smells and allergens. Cleo trailed behind her, wearing full glam makeup and holding her phone out in front of her face. "Oh, my poor baby," Beatrice wailed. Her voice was not hushed. It was loud, theatrical, echoing off the tile walls. Hazel flinched, a weak groan escaping her dry lips. The sudden noise was like an ice pick to her recovering brain. I shot out of my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, keeping my voice as low as possible. "You cannot be in here. She needs quiet." Beatrice ignored me entirely. She pushed past me, bumping my shoulder, and leaned over the bed. The overwhelming stench of her floral perfume filled the cramped space. "Grandma is here, darling," Beatrice cooed loudly, petting Hazel's blanket. "We are praying so hard for you." Behind her, Cleo stepped forward. I watched in absolute horror as my sister raised her phone, the camera lens pointed directly at Hazel's swollen, tube-filled face. Click. A bright flash went off. Hazel gasped, her eyes squeezing shut in pain. Her heart monitor immediately spiked, the steady beep accelerating into an alarmed, frantic rhythm. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I grabbed Cleo's wrist, shoving her hand down. "Delete that right now." Cleo snatched her arm back, looking at me like I had just slapped her. "Relax, Maeve. I am just updating my followers. People are, really worried about her. I need to show them I am here supporting my family. She is not content for your Instagram." I snarled, stepping between them and the bed. "Get out. Both of you. Now." Beatrice stood up straight, clutching her pearls, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. The grieving grandmother act vanished instantly. Excuse me? We drove 2 hours to see our sick granddaughter, and this is how you treat us. She just had brain surgery. I pointed to the monitor, which was still beeping rapidly. You brought flowers into a sterile room, you used a camera flash in the eyes of a neuro patient, and you are screaming. Get out. You are hysterical, Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with venom. You have always been so controlling. You are using this illness to cut us off. You just want to isolate her so she only has you. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I was vibrating with a rage so profound it blurred my vision. I reached for the call button on the bed rail and pressed it hard. Less than 10 seconds later, Dr. Soren, the attending neurosurgeon, stepped into the room. He took one look at the spiking monitor, the lilies, and the phone in Cleo's hand, and his face turned to stone. Who are you? Dr. Soren demanded, his voice dangerously low. I am her grandmother. Beatrice puffed up her chest, attempting to assert dominance. And this is her aunt. We have a right to be here. You have a right to leave, Dr. Soren said, stepping toward the door and holding it open. Right now. Security will escort you out of the building. Do not ever bring organic matter or flash photography into my ICU again. Beatrice's face flushed a mottled, ugly red. She was not used to being spoken to with authority. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying, icy promise. You're a sick woman, Maeve, she whispered, ensuring the doctor could not hear. You are going to regret this. We are her family too. They stormed out, leaving a trail of heavy perfume behind them. I spent the next 2 hours holding a cold washcloth to Hazel's forehead, watching her heart rate slowly stabilize, shaking with the adrenaline of the confrontation. I thought that getting them kicked out of the hospital was the climax of our conflict. I thought the embarrassment of being escorted out by security would force them to back off, at least until Hazel was fully recovered. I was wrong. So incredibly wrong. Narcissists do not experience embarrassment the way normal people do. They experience it as a grievous injury, a declaration of war. By throwing them out of her hospital room, I had publicly humiliated Beatrice in front of a doctor. I had denied Cleo her tragedy-porn social media posts. They did not care about the hospital anymore. They wanted a bigger stage. A place where I could not call security. A place where they held the power, surrounded by people who would validate their delusion that they were the perfect, loving family, and I was the crazy, abusive daughter keeping them apart. And that stage, I realized as I stared at the glowing screen of my phone on the kitchen counter, was my home. I wiped a spot of condensation off the granite counter and finally tapped the screen to open the message. It was a group text. Beatrice, Alistair, Cleo, and a few extended family members were on it. The message was from Beatrice. Change of plans. The country club double-booked our 40th anniversary gala. Clear your mountain home by Friday morning. We are hosting 50 guests there on Saturday. Caterers arrive at noon. I read it 3 times. The words felt like they were written in a foreign language. There was no greeting. There was no question mark. It was a royal decree issued to a peasant. My heart started to pound a heavy, rhythmic beat against my ribs. I looked over at the living room. Hazel was asleep on the couch, the soft blue light of the air purifier washing over her pale face. I typed back carefully. I did not use exclamation points. I did not let my panic bleed into the text. I remained the appraiser, dealing with a hostile squatter. That is not possible. Hazel is home after brain surgery. Her immune system is compromised. She cannot be near crowds, noise, or unapproved visitors. The doctors forbid it. I watched the 3 little typing dots bubble up on the screen. It took Beatrice less than 30 seconds to reply. Hide her in the attic. Give her some sleeping pills. We only need the main floor and the deck. Do not be dramatic, Maeve. Hide her in the attic. I felt a physical chill sweep through my veins. It was not anger. Anger is hot and loud. This was absolute, sub-zero clarity. My mother was telling me to shove my critically ill teenager into an uninsulated storage space above the garage, to drug her into unconsciousness, so she could drink wine and eat canapés with 50 people who did not care if we lived or died. In the past, I would have called her. I would have cried. I would have tried to explain, using logic and medical terms, begging her to understand my perspective. I would have wasted hours trying to squeeze a drop of empathy out of a stone. But looking at Hazel's chest slowly rising and falling under the fleece blanket, something inside me permanently snapped. The invisible string tying me to my parents simply dissolved. I typed 2 words. All right. I hit send. My phone immediately buzzed with a reply from Alistair. Glad you finally found some common sense. Make sure the driveway is raked. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the entire conversation. Then I closed the messaging app and opened my email. My brain was running a mile a minute. Why the sudden change of plans? The country club in our hometown was notoriously strict. They did not just double-book a massive anniversary gala a few days before the event. It made no sense. I opened the search bar in my email and typed my mother's name. I scrolled past old holiday recipes and passive-aggressive forwards until I found an email from my Aunt Cora, sent about a month ago. It was a forwarded message with the subject line, "Forward, save the date." I had ignored it at the time, assuming it was just a generic announcement for their anniversary. Now, I clicked on the attachment. It was an elegant, digital invitation. Gold cursive font over a watercolor background. Please join Beatrice and Alistair for an intimate gala celebrating 40 years of love and family. Saturday the 18th, hosted at the family's mountain retreat. The address listed at the bottom was my address. The date on the email was from 30 days ago. While Hazel was still in the hospital, fighting for her life, before Beatrice had ever even asked to use my house, she had already sent out 50 invitations declaring my home as the venue. There was no double booking at the country club. The club was never the venue. My house was the venue all along. They had planned to ambush me. They knew if they asked me a month ago, I would say no. So they waited until 5 days before the event, when invitations were already accepted, caterers were already paid, and the social pressure was insurmountable. They assumed I would fold to avoid embarrassing them in front of their wealthy friends. They assumed I would lock my sick child away to protect their fragile public image. They were treating my sanctuary like a free event hall, and me like the unruly staff. I sat down heavily on a bar stool. The audacity was so massive it had its own gravitational pull. They were not just crossing a boundary, they were trying to bulldoze my entire reality. I looked back at the screenshot of my mother telling me to lock Hazel in the attic. Okay, Beatrice, I thought, a strange, terrifying calm washing over me. You want a show? I will give you a show you will never forget. If you are dealing with toxic family members, the worst thing you can do is telegraph your punches. Do not argue. Do not threaten. Just move in silence. I picked up my phone and dialed Talia. Talia was a ruthless, brilliant property lawyer I had worked with for years. She handled complex zoning disputes and hostile evictions. She was a shark in a tailored suit, and she did not tolerate fools. She answered on the second ring. Maeve. Tell me you are not looking at spreadsheets right now. Your kid just got out of the ICU. I need a favor, Talia. A legal one. Not real estate. I laid it out for her. The text messages. The fake country club story. The invitations sent a month ago. The demand to hide Hazel in the attic. For a long moment, there was only silence on the line. Then, I heard the sharp click of a pen. I am going to destroy them, Talia said quietly. What do you want to do? I want an airtight trespass notice drafted immediately. I want it sent by a certified mail, overnight delivery, and email to both of my parents. I want it to explicitly state that their permission to enter my property is permanently revoked, and any attempt to cross the gate will result in arrest. Done. I will have it drafted in 10 minutes. What about the girl? You cannot have her there when these lunatics show up. I am moving her, I said, glancing toward the living room. The hospital has a transitional medical apartment downtown for post-op patients who need to be close to the clinic. I am taking her there tomorrow morning. Good. You stay at the house. You hold the fort. You let them walk right into the trap. Talia paused. Maeve, be careful. People who pull stunts like this, they do not stop at trespassing. They are building a narrative. Talia was right. I just did not realize how fast that narrative was being constructed. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. It was Susan, the head of the Homeowners Association for my mountain community. Susan was a nosy woman, but she generally liked me because I always paid my dues on time and kept my property pristine. Maeve, honey, are you all right? Susan's voice was dripping with forced sympathy. I am fine, Susan. Just tending to Hazel. Why? Well, she hesitated. I just got off the phone with your mother, Beatrice. She called the HOA board to ask for a temporary parking variance for Saturday. She said you were hosting a family reunion. I gripped the edge of the counter. Susan, there is no family reunion. I did not authorize any event. That is what I figured, Susan sighed. But Maeve, Beatrice told me she had to take over the planning because you are, well, she said you were having a severe mental breakdown. My blood ran cold. Excuse me? She said the stress of Hazel's surgery made you snap. She said you are deeply depressed, irrational, and that you are keeping Hazel locked in a dark room and refusing to let anyone see her. She told me the family is coming up on Saturday to intervene and rescue the poor girl, and that we should not be alarmed if there is yelling. The room spun. I had to lean heavily against the counter to keep my balance. They were not just planning a party. They were planning a rescue mission. Beatrice was planting seeds with my neighbors, painting me as an abusive, mentally unstable mother who was endangering her own child. If the neighbors heard shouting on Saturday, they would not think my parents were trespassing. They would think a loving family was trying to save a sick teenager from a crazy woman. This was the groundwork for a custody battle. My parents wanted to take Hazel. They wanted to prove I was unfit, take my daughter, and play the heroic grandparents for the rest of their lives. Susan, I said, forcing my voice to remain dead calm. My mother is lying. My daughter is recovering from brain surgery. Her neurosurgeon has mandated a sterile environment with no visitors. My parents are trying to force a 50-person party onto my property against medical advice. I have retained a lawyer, and the police will be involved if they step foot on my land. Susan gasped softly. Oh my God. Maeve, I am so sorry. I will deny the parking variance immediately. And I will email the board so everyone knows. Thank you, Susan. Please keep this between us. I hung up the phone and walked into the bathroom. I locked the door, turned on the faucet so Hazel would not hear, and threw up into the sink. The sheer malice of it was suffocating. My own mother was trying to build a legal case to steal my traumatized child, using a fake anniversary party as the stage. If you have ever had a mother who smiles in public while holding a knife to your back in private, hit the subscribe button. Because what I did next was for every single one of us who had to learn how to fight back in the dark. I washed my face, stared at my pale reflection in the mirror, and put the appraiser mask back on. I spent the rest of Thursday night gathering evidence. I pulled the property deeds proving I was the sole owner of the house. I printed Dr. Soren's medical directives forbidding crowds and stress. I saved the text messages, the leaked email with the invitation, and the notification from Talia that the trespass notice had been successfully delivered to my parents' inbox. On Friday morning, I packed a small bag for Hazel. Are we going back to the hospital? She asked, panic flashing in her tired eyes as I helped her into a warm jacket. No, sweetie. We are going to a quiet apartment downtown for the weekend. The doctors want you closer for a checkup, and there's some maintenance happening at the house. I hated lying to her. I hated it. But she was in no condition to hear that her grandparents were staging a hostile takeover of our lives. I drove her down the mountain, settled her into the sterile, secure medical apartment, and hired a private duty nurse to sit with her. I will be back tomorrow evening, I promised, kissing her bandaged forehead. Don't let the bears eat my snacks, she mumbled, drifting off to sleep. I drove back up the mountain alone. The house felt huge and empty. I checked the perimeter. I tested the smart locks on the front and side doors. I verified that the outdoor security cameras were recording to the cloud. I was ready. Friday evening descended over the mountains, bringing a biting wind that rattled the pine trees against the siding of my cabin. I sat in the dark living room, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hands, my laptop open on the coffee table displaying the live feed from my 4 exterior security cameras. The trespass notice had been signed for by Alistair at 2 p.m. that afternoon. I had the digital delivery receipt. They knew they were legally barred from the property. But I knew Alistair. He had the ego of a man who had never been told no and meant it. He viewed legal documents as suggestions for lesser people. At exactly 8:45 p.m., headlights swept across my long gravel driveway. I leaned forward, my heart thumping a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. On the screen, a heavy-duty pickup truck rolled to a stop right in front of the closed iron gate at the bottom of my driveway. 2 men got out. One was my father, Alistair, wearing a thick hunting jacket. The other was a man in a gray uniform carrying a heavy metal toolbox. A locksmith. They were trying to break in the night before the party to set up. I did not panic. I simply picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the local sheriff's department. I had already called them earlier that day to place the trespass notice on file. Dispatch, this is Maeve. I own the property at the end of Ridge Road. There are 2 men currently attempting to breach my gate. One of them is a family member who was served a trespass notice today. I need an officer on site. Copy that. A cruiser is in the area. ETA is 4 minutes. Do not engage them, ma'am. I hung up. I watched the camera feed. Alistair was pointing at the electronic keypad on the gate, arguing with the locksmith. I tapped the microphone icon on my laptop to activate the 2-way audio on the gate camera. Can I help you? My voice boomed through the outdoor speaker, echoing in the cold night air. Alistair jumped, glaring up at the camera lens. Maeve, open this damn gate. I hired a guy to fix the lock so the caterers can get in tomorrow. The gate is not broken, Alistair, I said, my voice eerily calm. And you do not have permission to be here. You received the legal notice this afternoon. Alistair turned to the locksmith, waving a dismissive hand. She is my daughter. She is having an episode. Just drill the lock, I will pay double. The locksmith looked extremely uncomfortable. He set his toolbox down. Sir, I need to see proof of residency or ownership before I destroy property. I am her father. This is a family home. Alistair bellowed. I pressed the microphone button again. Sir, my name is Maeve. I am the sole legal owner of this property. That man does not live here. If you touch that gate, I will press charges for destruction of private property. The locksmith did not hesitate. He picked up his toolbox, shook his head at my father, and walked straight back to his van. Hey, get back here. Alistair shouted, his face turning an ugly shade of purple under the yellow glow of the security light. But the locksmith just started his engine and backed down the road. Alistair was left standing alone in the cold. He paced back and forth in front of the gate for a moment, muttering to himself. Then he walked to the bed of his pickup truck. When he turned back around, he was holding a solid steel crowbar. My breath caught in my throat. He marched up to the pedestrian side gate, wedged the flat end of the crowbar into the latch, and leaned his entire body weight against it. He was actually trying to pry my gate open. Crack. The sound of stressing metal echoed loudly through the audio feed. I grabbed my phone to upgrade the call to an emergency, but before my thumb could hit the dial button, red and blue lights flooded the camera feed. Sheriff Eamon's cruiser pulled up, tires crunching aggressively on the gravel. Eamon stepped out, his hand resting casually but firmly on his utility belt. Drop the bar. Now, Eamon's voice carried over the feed, sharp and authoritative. Alistair froze. He slowly lowered the crowbar, letting it clatter to the dirt. He immediately put his hands up, slapping on a fake, jovial smile. Evening, officer. Just a little family misunderstanding. My daughter's lock is jammed, trying to help her out before a big event tomorrow. Eamon walked closer, kicking the crowbar out of reach. I have a trespass notice on file for this address, listing an Alistair and Beatrice. Identify yourself. Now listen here. Alistair's fake smile vanished, replaced by indignation. You do not understand the situation. My daughter is not well. We are trying to care for her sick child. She is acting erratic. Sir, are you on the deed to this property? Eamon asked, cutting through the manipulation with absolute boredom. It is family property, that is a no. You have been served notice. You are currently attempting forced entry with a tool. I can arrest you right now for attempted burglary, or you can get in your truck, drive away, and never come back. Your choice. Alistair stared at the sheriff, his jaw working furiously. He looked up at the camera, pointing a thick, shaking finger at the lens. You are making a massive mistake, Maeve, he growled. You cannot stop family. We will be here tomorrow. With 50 people. Let us see you try to arrest all of us in front of the whole town. He snatched his crowbar off the ground, got into his truck, and sped away, spraying gravel across the asphalt. Sheriff Eamon looked up at the camera. I pressed the mic button. Thank you, Sheriff. I will have a unit stationed at the bottom of the road tomorrow morning, ma'am, Eamon said. Have a good night. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of a war that had finally gone hot. Just as I stood up to pour my cold coffee down the sink, my phone chimed with a new email. It was from an unknown sender. The name on the account was Freya. I opened it. Hi, Maeve. My name is Freya. I am a freelance videographer. Your mother, Beatrice, hired me to film your family reunion tomorrow. Something felt wrong about the contract she asked me to sign, so I started digging and found your name on the property records, not hers. I thought you should see the shot list she sent me. I scrolled down to the attached PDF. It was a detailed schedule for the party. But it was the notes section at the bottom that made my blood run cold. Camera instruction. When we arrive, Maeve will likely become agitated and hostile. Do not stop filming. It is crucial to capture her screaming or acting erratic. Zoom in on her face. If she tries to block the door, film the confrontation. We need this footage to prove her emotional instability to the judge for the custody hearing. Do not stop rolling, no matter what she says. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. My mother had not just invited 50 people to a fake anniversary party. She had hired a professional camera crew to document my engineered mental breakdown. She wanted to provoke me into screaming, crying, or getting violent, so she could hand a beautifully edited 4K video to a family court judge and steal my child. She wanted a monster on film. I smiled. A cold, dark smile that did not reach my eyes. Okay, Beatrice, I whispered to the empty house. You brought the cameras. But I am writing the script. If you are enjoying this story of setting traps for toxic parents, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and comment down below if you have ever had to deal with a family member trying to gaslight you. You are not going to want to miss what happens when the sun comes up. Saturday morning broke with a painfully bright, cloudless sky. The mountain air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and impending disaster. I stood on my wraparound porch, a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee warming my hands, watching the road. I was wearing simple jeans and a thick wool sweater. I did not dress for a party. I dressed for a siege. Down at the bottom of the gravel driveway, my iron gate remained firmly locked. Just inside the property line, Sheriff Eamon stood leaning against the hood of his cruiser. He had his mirrored sunglasses on, his arms crossed, projecting an aura of absolute, immovable authority. At exactly 11 o'clock, the invasion began. It started with a single black Mercedes, followed by a silver Lexus, and then a rented luxury shuttle bus. Within 10 minutes, there were 50 people milling about on the shoulder of the narrow dirt road outside my gate. It was a surreal, sickening sight. These were my parents' country club associates, wealthy neighbors, and extended family members. They were dressed in tailored blazers, expensive silk dresses, and designer overcoats. The women were trying to balance in high heels on the uneven gravel. Several of them carried beautifully wrapped anniversary gifts. A few held covered casserole dishes and expensive bottles of imported wine. They looked like they were arriving for a high society gala, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing on a dirt road in the middle of the woods, staring at a police barricade. Then, my parents' vehicle arrived. Beatrice stepped out of the passenger side, wearing a powder blue suit that probably cost more than my first car. She carefully balanced a massive, tiered white anniversary cake in her hands. The cake was ridiculous, decorated with spun sugar flowers and a banner that read 40 years of devotion. She pasted a serene, glowing smile onto her face and turned toward the crowd of guests, basking in their attention. She did not look up at the house. She did not ask how Hazel was doing. She immediately went to work on her audience. I watched from the porch, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I could hear her voice carrying up the hill. "Thank you all so much for coming," Beatrice projected, ensuring everyone could hear the tremble of forced emotion in her tone. "It means the world to us to have our family and friends here to celebrate. There has been a slight misunderstanding with my daughter this morning, but we will have the gates open in just a moment." She walked up to the iron gate, her smile faltering just a fraction when she saw Sheriff Amon. "Officer," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for retail workers. "I believe there has been a mistake. My daughter, Maeve, invited us here for a family celebration. She has been under a tremendous amount of stress lately, and she sometimes gets a little confused. If you would just open the gate, we can get this sorted out privately." Amon did not unfold his arms. He did not even adjust his sunglasses. "Ma'am, the legal owner of this property has denied permission for any gathering," Amon stated, his voice flat and loud enough for the first few rows of guests to hear. "There was an attempted forced entry on this property last night after a trespass notice was formally served. No one is crossing this line without the owner's explicit consent." A ripple of confused whispers moved through the crowd of 50 people. Women in silk dresses exchanged nervous glances. Beatrice's face tightened. The powder blue suit suddenly looked a lot less elegant. "Attempted forced entry? That is absurd. My husband was simply trying to help prepare the property. Maeve is not in her right mind. She is locking her sick daughter away in a dark room. We are here to support them." Just as she delivered that line, a white commercial van pulled up behind the line of luxury cars. It was Freya, the freelance videographer. She stepped out of her van, wearing dark jeans and a black utility jacket. She was not carrying her heavy camera equipment. Instead, she was holding a manila folder. Beatrice's eyes lit up. She saw her weapon arriving. She immediately waved Freya forward. "Oh, good, the videographer is here," Beatrice announced to the crowd, her confidence returning. "Freya, dear, please start recording right now. People need to see exactly what is happening here. They need to see what my daughter is doing to us on our anniversary." Freya walked right up to the gate, ignoring my mother entirely. She looked at Amon, then looked up the hill at me standing on the porch. "Are you Maeve?" Freya called out. "I am," I replied, my voice steady. Freya turned to Beatrice. She opened the manila folder. "I will not be filming anything today," Freya said. Her voice was calm, professional, and devastatingly clear. "I was hired under the strict representation that the homeowner had approved this event. I was told this was a family reconciliation. Last night, I pulled the county property records. Beatrice does not own this house. Furthermore, the instructions I was given explicitly directed me to provoke and film the homeowner in a state of emotional distress." The whispers in the crowd stopped. Dead silence fell over the dirt road. "You are breaching your contract," Beatrice hissed, her face turning a mottled red. "I paid a deposit. You are supposed to document this family." "I am protecting my business," Freya replied, holding up the printed shot list Beatrice had emailed her. "You hired me to record a mental breakdown, not an anniversary. I do not participate in targeted harassment. Keep the deposit. Consider my contract terminated." Freya turned around, walked back to her white van, and drove away. Beatrice stood frozen, holding the $500 cake, her carefully constructed narrative cracking right down the middle. She turned back to the guests, her eyes wide, desperately trying to salvage the situation. "She is lying," Beatrice stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the departing van. "Maeve must have threatened her. Maeve is extremely manipulative. You all know how much we love Hazel. We are just trying to save our granddaughter." I stepped off the porch and began walking down the long gravel driveway toward the gate. It was time. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was going to tear the roof off her little stage and expose the rot underneath. What would you do if your own mother tried to frame you for abuse in front of 50 people? As I walked down the hill, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, the crowd of 50 guests watched me with a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound discomfort. I stopped about 3 feet behind the iron gate, standing next to Sheriff Amon. I did not look at Alistair, who was pacing furiously near his truck. I looked directly at my mother. I did not threaten the videographer, Beatrice, I said, my voice projecting clearly in the crisp mountain air. I simply refused to participate in the movie you were trying to produce. You are making a public spectacle of our family, Beatrice cried out, pressing a hand to her chest. She looked at her country club friends, tears welling up in her eyes. We just wanted to see our granddaughter. We just wanted to share our anniversary with the child we love. Before I could answer, a woman pushed her way to the front of the crowd. It was my Aunt Cora. She was clutching her expensive leather handbag against her chest. She looked pale, her eyes darting between me and my mother. Cora had always been one of Beatrice's most loyal followers, a flying monkey who readily repeated whatever lies my mother spun. But today, something had broken her programming. Beatrice, Cora said, her voice shaking slightly. If we are just here for an anniversary party, why did you make us bring these? Cora reached into her handbag and pulled out a sealed, cream-colored envelope. It had her name printed neatly on the front. Beatrice lunged forward, nearly dropping the cake. Cora, put that away. That is private family business. Cora stepped back, out of my mother's reach. She looked at me through the iron bars of the gate. Your mother handed these out to all the guests at a private dinner last night. She told us we were supposed to sign them today, after the cake was cut. What is it, Aunt Cora? I asked gently. Cora broke the seal on the envelope. She pulled out a crisp, typewritten document. She called it a family memory statement, Cora read, her voice growing louder, carrying across the silent crowd. But it is not a memory. It is a legal affidavit. And it is already filled out. A collective murmur rolled through the 50 guests. Several other people, including some of Alistair's golf buddies, started reaching into their suit pockets and purses, pulling out identical cream-colored envelopes. Read it, Cora, I prompted. Cora swallowed hard, looking down at the paper. It says, I, the undersigned, witnessed Maeve acting in a highly erratic and hostile manner on Saturday the 18th. I personally observed her shouting accusations and acting violently toward her parents, who were only trying to deliver a gift. I also personally observed her 15-year-old daughter, Hazel, crying from a small attic window, appearing trapped and neglected. Cora stopped reading and looked up at the attic window above my garage. It was completely dark. The blinds were drawn. It goes on to say, Cora continued, her voice thick with disgust, that I watched the sheriff have to physically restrain Maeve due to her emotional instability. It asks for my signature at the bottom, swearing under penalty of perjury that this is a true account. The crowd erupted. 50 people started tearing open their envelopes. They were all reading the exact same pre-written lies. Beatrice had mass-produced perjury. She had created an evidence factory, hoping social pressure and a free slice of cake would convince these people to sign away my custody rights. I stepped right up to the iron gate, gripping the cold metal bars. Aunt Cora, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. Did you see me act violently today? No, Cora whispered. Did you see Sheriff Amon restrain me? No. I pointed up to the dark window above the garage. Do you see a sick child crying in that attic? Cora shook her head, tears spilling over her eyelashes. You do not see her, I said, my voice rising, vibrating with absolute fury, because she is not even in this zip code. My daughter is recovering from brain surgery. She is miles away in a secure, sterile medical facility. She was never in that attic. My mother just wanted you to swear she was, so she could hand those papers to a judge and take my child away. Beatrice's face was completely drained of color. The powder blue suit seemed to hang off her suddenly shrinking frame. The $500 cake in her hands was shaking violently. They're just contingency drafts. Alistair bellowed, trying to rescue his wife. He stepped forward, his face red with rage. Our lawyer told us to prepare for the worst. You are unstable, Maeve. You have isolated that girl. The guests were not buying it. A man in a tailored suit, one of Alistair's oldest friends, crumpled up his affidavit and tossed it onto the dirt road. "You asked us to sign a lie, Alistair," the man said in disgust. "You tried to use us to frame your own daughter." One by one, the envelopes hit the dirt. People were turning around, walking back to their luxury SUVs and the rented shuttle bus. The grand illusion had collapsed. My mother had tried to build a stage to destroy me, but she forgot that when you turn on the bright lights, everyone can see the strings. Are you ready to see how a narcissist reacts when their entire world burns down in front of them? I was not finished. The guests were leaving, but I needed to drive the final nail into the coffin of their public image. "Hold on a minute," I called out to the retreating crowd. "Do not leave just yet. If you came here for the truth, let me give it to you." I turned and jogged back up to the porch. I grabbed the heavy folding table I had pre-staged by the door, along with a thick manila folder. I carried it down the driveway and slammed the table down just inside the iron gate. It was the ultimate power move. They had tried to drown me in lies. I was going to bury them in receipts. I opened the folder and slapped the first document onto the plastic table. "This," I announced, tapping the paper, "is a medical directive signed by the chief of neurosurgery at the state hospital. It explicitly states that exposing my daughter to a gathering of 50 people creates a catastrophic, life-threatening risk to her healing brain." My parents received a copy of this on Wednesday. They knew this party could kill her. I slapped down a second document. "This is the deed to this property. It shows that I, Maeve, am the sole owner. I paid $210,000 for this house out of my own pocket. My parents have zero financial or legal claim to this land. It is not a family retreat. It is my sanctuary." I pulled out the third document, a certified mail receipt. "And this is the digital signature proving my father, Alistair, received a formal trespass notice yesterday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Despite knowing he was legally barred from this property, he showed up here last night with a locksmith and a steel crowbar, attempting to break down my gate." The contrast was beautifully ironic. On one side of the gate stood wealthy people in expensive clothes, holding cheap, fabricated lies. On my side of the gate stood a woman in an old sweater, armed with cold, hard, undisputed facts. Alistair could not handle it. The public exposure of his criminal behavior broke the last shred of his self-control. "You ungrateful little brat," Alistair roared. He stomped over to his heavy-duty pickup truck and reached into the bed. He pulled out a massive, portable PA speaker and a coiled extension cord. "Alistair, what are you doing?" Beatrice shrieked, finally realizing the situation was completely out of control. "I am going to plug this in on the lawn and tell everyone exactly what kind of daughter she is," Alistair yelled. He hoisted the heavy speaker onto his shoulder and marched directly toward the pedestrian side gate. Sheriff Eamon stepped directly into his path. "Sir, put the equipment down. You are violating a trespass notice." "Get out of my way, officer," Alistair sneered, his ego blinding him to the badge. "I am walking onto my own family's grass to plug in a speaker. You are not going to arrest a 72-year-old man over a piece of lawn." Alistair shoved his shoulder past Eamon and took exactly 2 steps onto my property. He did not get to take a third. Eamon moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Alistair's arm, spun him around, and slammed him chest-first against the iron bars of the gate. The heavy PA speaker crashed into the dirt. "Alistair!" Beatrice screamed, dropping the $500 anniversary cake. The white frosting and spun sugar flowers splattered across the gravel ruined. "Alistair, you are under arrest for criminal trespass," Eamon said calmly, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The sharp clicking sound of the cuffs ratcheting shut echoed in the sudden silence of the mountain air. "You cannot do this," Alistair yelled, struggling against the iron gate as Eamon patted him down. "I am a respected businessman. She is my daughter." "She is the property owner, and you are a trespasser," Eamon corrected him, guiding my father away from the gate and toward the back of the police cruiser. Beatrice stood paralyzed in the driveway, staring at the ruined cake at her feet, and then at her husband being shoved into the back of a police car. The guests who had lingered to watch the spectacle immediately turned away, shielding their faces, practically running to their luxury cars. No one wanted to be associated with a man being arrested in the dirt. My mother looked up at me. Her carefully styled hair was coming undone in the mountain wind. She had nothing left. No audience. No golden child sister to back her up. Cleo had conveniently stayed home in Los Angeles, avoiding the mess entirely. "You did this," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with a toxic mixture of shock and hatred. "You ruined our family." "No, Beatrice," I said, picking up my documents and folding the table. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who built the haunted house." I turned my back on her and walked up the driveway. I did not look over my shoulder as the police cruiser drove away, taking my father to a holding cell. I locked the front door of my cabin, packed my laptop, and got into my car. I had won the battle at the gate. But as I drove down the mountain toward the medical apartment in the city to check on Hazel, a heavy sense of dread settled in my stomach. The physical threat was gone, but the psychological war was not over. When I finally walked into the quiet, sterile apartment, Hazel was awake. She was sitting up in bed, holding her tablet, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. What I found on that screen was far darker than any fake affidavit. It was the ultimate betrayal. The transitional medical apartment was dead quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I paid the private duty nurse, thanked her, and locked the door behind her. I walked into the small bedroom. Hazel was sitting propped up against a mountain of white pillows. The surgical bandages around her head looked startlingly stark in the dim light. She was clutching her tablet to her chest, her knuckles white. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Did they come?" I sat gently on the edge of the mattress, being careful not to jostle the bed. "They came. They tried to put on a show. But they're gone now. Grandpa Alistair was arrested for trespassing. It is over." Hazel did not look relieved. Instead, a tear slipped out of the corner of her eye, tracking down her pale cheek. She uncrossed her arms and held the tablet out to me. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice barely a breath. "I should have shown you sooner." "I am so sorry, Mom. I thought I could handle it." I took the tablet. The screen was open to her private messaging app. It was a direct conversation thread with Beatrice, dating back over 6 months, starting long before the brain surgery. I began to read, and the blood slowly drained from my face. It started innocently enough. Beatrice asking about school, complaining about the weather. But then, the tone shifted. The manipulation was so subtle, so insidious, it made my skin crawl. "Does your mother ever let you have a say in anything, sweetheart? It seems like she is always dictating your schedule." Hazel had replied, "Mom just wants me to focus on my grades." A week later, Beatrice wrote, "It breaks my heart to see you so isolated in that house on the mountain. Do you ever feel lonely? Do you ever feel like you are just trapped up there with her rules?" I scrolled further down, moving into the weeks leading up to Hazel's diagnosis, when her headaches had started getting severe. "If you ever need a place to escape, you know Grandma and Grandpa have a room for you. A place where you can actually breathe and make your own choices." Sometimes mothers get too controlling because they are jealous of their daughter's youth. "You can tell me if you feel trapped, Hazel." My mother had been actively trying to groom my daughter to hate me. She was planting seeds of doubt, trying to paint my protection as imprisonment. But the final messages, sent while Hazel was recovering in the ICU, were the ones that made me physically nauseous. Beatrice had sent a photo. It was a picture of a bedroom in my parents' house. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue. There was a new, plush bed and a bookshelf filled with Hazel's favorite fantasy novels. "I finished painting your room," Beatrice had written. "It is ready for you whenever you are ready to come home to a real family. The lawyers say we might have to ask you a few questions soon to help get you out of there. If anyone in a suit ever asks you how you feel at your mother's house, I want you to use the word trapped. Can you do that for Grandma? Just say you feel trapped. It is our secret code." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. Beatrice was not just planning an ambush party. She had been coaching my child to testify against me in a custody hearing. She was feeding a vulnerable, sick teenager the exact legal vocabulary needed to trigger a Child Protective Services investigation. Hazel, I choked out, setting the tablet face down on the bedside table. Why did not you tell me? Hazel looked down at her hands, picking at her cuticles. You were already working so hard to pay for the medical bills. You were always stressed. I thought if I just ignored her, she would stop. I did not want to add to your plate. I am sorry. A profound, shattering heartbreak washed over me. I had spent my entire life walking on eggshells, managing my parents' volatile emotions, absorbing their abuse so they would not blow up. And by trying to shield Hazel from the reality of who they were, I had accidentally taught her to do the exact same thing. I had taught her that love meant carrying the burden in silence. I reached out and gently took her hands in mine. Hazel, look at me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She slowly lifted her chin. I am so incredibly sorry, I told her. I am sorry that I ever let them have access to you. I am sorry that you felt you had to protect me. But listen to me very carefully, it is my job to protect you. You never, ever have to manage the feelings of adults. You do not have to keep toxic secrets just to keep the peace. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But what if they take me away? Grandma said they have lawyers. They have lawyers, I agreed, a cold, hard resolve settling over my grief. But we have the truth. And I promise you, on my life, they will never force you to step foot in that blue bedroom. I will burn their entire world to the ground in court before I let them touch you. I pulled her into a careful, gentle hug, mindful of her bandages. For the first time in months, I felt Hazel actually relax against my shoulder. The terrible burden of her secret was gone. Now, the real war was about to begin. Beatrice wanted to take this to a judge? Fine. I would give her a legal slaughter she would never forget. If you have ever had to break generational trauma to protect your own kids, let me know in the comments. The courtroom showdown is next, and I promise you, the financial numbers alone will make your jaw drop. 3 weeks later, the swelling in Hazel's brain had subsided enough for her to walk without assistance, and my parents' emergency motion for grandparent visitation and temporary custody hit the docket of the county family court. I walked into the courtroom wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. I did not bring Hazel. I refused to let her be put on display. I walked in alone, with my lawyer, Talia, walking beside me, carrying a massive, heavily tabbed legal binder. Beatrice and Alastair were already seated at the petitioner's table. Alastair looked diminished, his usual arrogance deflated by the reality of his pending criminal trespass charges. Beatrice, however, was in full performance mode. She wore a modest, conservative dress and clutched a lace handkerchief, looking like a fragile, heartbroken matriarch. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Honorable Davis, called the court to order. My parents' attorney, an expensive litigator in a slick suit, stood up to make his opening statement. He spun a masterful, tragic tale. He talked about how Beatrice and Alastair were devoted grandparents, deeply concerned for the welfare of their granddaughter following a traumatic brain surgery. He claimed I was suffering from caregiver burnout, leading to extreme paranoia and emotional instability. Your Honor, the slick lawyer said, gesturing dramatically toward Beatrice, who dabbed her dry eyes with the handkerchief. We have evidence that the respondent, Maeve, is isolating the child and behaving erratically. We have a text message where Maeve explicitly agreed to host a family gathering, only to violently turn on her parents when they arrived. He submitted a printed screenshot of our text exchange to the judge. It showed Beatrice's text, "We are hosting 50 guests there on Saturday," followed immediately by my reply, "All right." They had cropped the image. They had intentionally deleted the part where Beatrice told me to hide her in the attic, leaving only my apparent agreement to the party. Judge Davis adjusted her glasses, looking down at the cropped image, and then looked over at me with a raised eyebrow. "Counselor," she addressed Talia. "Your client appears to have consented to this event." Talia stood up slowly. She did not rush. She exuded the terrifying calm of an apex predator. Your Honor, if opposing counsel is going to submit digital evidence, they should ensure it has not been fraudulently altered to omit child endangerment, Talia said clearly. The opposing lawyer bristled. Objection. That is a baseless accusation. Talia did not even look at him. She opened our massive binder and pulled out a stack of papers. I am submitting Exhibit A, the fully authenticated, unedited data logs of the text conversation, pulled directly from the cellular provider. A bailiff handed the papers to the judge. Judge Davis read the full exchange. I watched the color drain from her face as she read the words, "Hide her in the attic. Give her some sleeping pills." The judge slowly lowered the paper and glared at my mother's lawyer. Counselor, did you review the complete logs before submitting a cropped screenshot to my court? The slick lawyer suddenly looked very sweaty. Your Honor, my clients provided the image to me. I was assured it was the complete context. It gets worse, Your Honor, Talia continued, relentlessly pressing the advantage. Not only did the petitioners demand a recovering brain surgery patient be locked in an unheated attic, they subsequently attempted to manufacture evidence of my client's mental instability to bolster this baseless custody grab. Talia submitted Exhibit B, Freya's contract and the shot list demanding footage of my emotional distress. Then she dropped the absolute hammer. Exhibit C, 50 copies of the pre-written family memory statements, complete with the fabricated accounts of me screaming and Hazel crying in the window. These affidavits were distributed to 50 unwitting guests the night before the event occurred, Your Honor. The petitioners literally pre-wrote the perjury they intended to submit to this court. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a brief second. Judge Davis looked at the stack of fake affidavits, then looked directly at Beatrice. The fragile, heartbroken matriarch act had completely vaporized. Beatrice was staring at the table, her hands shaking, realizing that her meticulous web of lies had just become a steel trap around her own neck. Mrs. Beatrice, Judge Davis said, her voice freezing the air in the room. Can you explain why you drafted legal affidavits describing an event that had not yet taken place? Beatrice opened her mouth, stammered, looked at her lawyer, and closed her mouth. She had absolutely nothing to say. Finally, Talia submitted the iPad messages. The coaching. The blue bedroom. The instruction to use the word trapped. Judge Davis didn't even need to hear closing arguments. She slammed her gavel down with a resounding crack. This is one of the most egregious, calculated attempts at parental alienation and evidence tampering I have seen in my career, Judge Davis announced, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The petition for grandparent visitation is denied with prejudice. You are explicitly barred from filing any further custody motions regarding this child. But the judge was not done. She looked down at the financial summary Talia had provided. Furthermore, Judge Davis continued, because this entire proceeding was predicated on fraudulent, heavily manipulated claims that forced the respondent to incur massive legal defense costs, I am ordering the petitioners to cover all attorney fees. You will pay the respondent exactly $24,750 within 30 days. If you fail to pay, a lien will be placed on your primary residence. $24,750. Alistair let out a strangled groan and buried his face in his hands. Beatrice sat perfectly still, staring blankly at the wall, her ego shattered into a million irreparable pieces. They had tried to take my daughter. Instead, they lost their public reputation, their access to my family, and a massive chunk of their retirement savings. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, the heavy weight of a lifetime of manipulation finally lifted off my shoulders. But the fallout of their public humiliation was just beginning. The collapse of my parents' empire did not happen in a single, fiery explosion. It happened slowly, like a rotting tree finally giving way to gravity. The country club friends who had attended the disastrous gate confrontation talked. Word spread rapidly through their wealthy social circles about the fake affidavits and Alistair's arrest. Within a month, Beatrice quietly resigned from her position on the HOA board, unable to face the icy stares of her neighbors. A few weeks after that, their membership at the country club was conveniently not renewed for the upcoming season. Alistair pled guilty to the criminal trespass charge to avoid jail time. He was sentenced to 1 year of probation, massive fines, and a permanent restraining order forbidding him from coming within 500 feet of my mountain home. But the most poetic justice came from their precious golden child. Cleo, the aspiring influencer, panicked when she heard the details of the court case. She was terrified that being associated with grandparents who faked evidence and endangered a sick child would ruin her fragile online brand. True to her selfish nature, the exact nature my parents had nurtured, Cleo immediately cut them off. She blocked their numbers, moved to a different apartment in Los Angeles without giving them the address, and posted a tearful video about cutting toxic negativity out of her life to protect her mental health. My parents had spent their entire lives investing in a daughter who abandoned them the second they were no longer useful, while trying to destroy the daughter who had actually built a life of substance. They were left completely alone in their big, empty house, with a freshly painted blue bedroom that would never be used. As for me and Hazel, we thrived. The check for $24,750 cleared my bank account precisely on the 30th day. I used a portion of it to pay off the remaining medical bills, and I put the rest into a college fund for Hazel. Every single dollar felt like a trophy. 6 months after the surgery, Hazel was officially cleared by the neurology team. The staples were gone, her hair was growing back in soft, curly waves, and her scans were completely clear. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the kitchen baking, enjoying the quiet serenity of the mountain. Hazel came walking down the stairs from her bedroom. She was holding a small, hand-painted wooden sign she had spent the morning working on. She walked over to the front door, grabbed a hammer and a nail, and hung the sign right at eye level. I walked over and read it. In bright, cheerful letters, she had painted, "Healing happens here. Entry by invitation." I felt a lump rise in my throat. I pulled her into a tight hug, resting my chin on top of her head. For the first time in 38 years, I did not feel like the invisible child. I felt like a mother who had fought a war for her daughter's safety and won total, unconditional victory. We never spoke to Beatrice and Alastair again. The silence they left behind was not heavy or sad. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Some of our extended relatives, the ones who still operated under the delusion that family is family no matter what, reached out a few times. They told me I was being too harsh. They said that making my elderly parents pay that massive legal fee and letting my father stay on probation was cruel. They argued that Beatrice and Alastair were just misguided and that a good daughter should learn how to forgive and forget. I blocked those relatives too. But it does leave me with a question, one that I want to pose to all of you who have followed this journey. Some people say that blood is thicker than water and that you should never use the legal system to crush your own parents, regardless of how toxic they are. They think I went too far by exposing their fake affidavits and forcing them to pay nearly $25,000. What do you think? Did I cross a line by utterly destroying my parents in a courtroom, or was it the only way to protect my daughter from monsters wearing family masks? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you have not subscribed yet, hit that button now to join our community, and leave a like if you believe that protecting your peace is more important than keeping toxic family members comfortable. Until next time, stay safe and guard your boundaries.